Thank you very much for coming today and giving us a little bit of time. I'm Alvaro Veritiz, head of DGA and Mexico. And I would like to have the panel introducing themselves in order to start and talking about such important topic as regulation in Latam, how regulation can foster innovation and growth in the region. So why don't we start with you, Viviana?
Hi, everybody. I'm Viviana Romo. I work from Mizuho Bank, but all my experience is related more to auditing, but IT auditing. But in this case, in Mizuho Bank, I'm in charge of all the topics related to payment systems, pay and speed, and all the topics related also to cybersecurity and information technology. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Pepe Fernández. I'm the legal director of business transformation at Grupo Salinas. I'm the legal responsible for the crypto and fintech and AI projects.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alvaro Veritiz. I am senior associate at Creel Garcia. And I used to be regulator. I used to work at CMBB, and I participate in the enacted of Fintech law. So happy to be with you today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maria Jose Contreras. I'm part of the public policy team at New Mexico and also the coordinator of the regulatory vice presidency of the Fintech Association Mexico. I'm very glad to be here today with you.
Thank you very much, everyone. So Alba, maybe we can start with you. Regulation is always a key aspect of the life of a fintech or any other regulated entity, right? Maybe you can start with us describing a little bit about the current landscape on regulation for fintech in Latin America and the key challenges you're seeing there.
Thank you, Alvaro. Well, as you can imagine, technology applied to financial system can involve everything. So the approaches that each jurisdiction has done are different. For example, the first one is we have a traditional entity, a bank, and the regulator modify this rule and incorporate some elements, for example, to make onboarding digital onboarding. And now the bank can have new clients without contact physically. As an example of this, we have, for example, the regulation of Brazil, that they don't have a specific fintech law, and they have incorporated those elements to the actual regulation. The second approach is contrary. We have a specific denominated fintech law, as here in Mexico, or for example, in Chile, and they have incorporated in this law new financial entities, specific technology applied to financial system, virtual assets, APIs, etc. And the third approach can be a specific regulation for new things. For example, virtual assets. El Salvador can be an example that in the traditional financial system, they don't have this kind of regulation, and they need specific regulation. Now, talking about which could be the main difficulties that an entity can have. It depends on the approach of the regulation. One of the main is that they face regulation made in another era. I mean, think about the securities market law here in Mexico. We used to call the new securities market law in 2005. And in 2005, we didn't have Bitcoin, as you can imagine. So think about tokenization and all those things. The securities market law doesn't contain any kind of those elements because in that time, they didn't exist. So try to imagine a regulation made for another time. Another difficulty can be facing restricted regulation that inhibit specific activities. For example, here in Mexico, we have the possibility for banks and for these new entities to operate with crypto assets in the law. But the secondary regulation enacted by the central bank forbids to operate with clients that transfer the risk. So in fact, even a bank applies for an authorization, they cannot operate with crypto assets with their clients. And imagine that you are a brokerage house. You cannot operate, even you cannot apply for authorization because the law forbids. Another important topic is more restricted regulation related with, for example, APIs. No? The law establishes the legal obligation to share information, but there is no secondary regulation to allow to operate with this. So I'm going to stop here, and we can continue with the discussion in a couple of minutes.
Thank you, Alban. We'll get back to you on certain aspects on what you just described. But for now, I would like to turn over Maria Jose. And I want to understand a little bit about challenges and opportunity that you anticipate will have most of the impact in the coming years for neobanks and fintechs. So how you're envisioning this environment?
Thanks for the question, Alvaro. First, before answering the question, I want to add on what Alba was saying.
Okay.
And I think something important to underline in the Mexican context is that digital finances are entering the market in Mexico not only through the fintech law, but also under other regulatory figures. For example, New Mexico is a SOFIPO, which is not regulated by the fintech law, but it's a digitally operated financial services entity. So that's something to take into account when we analyze the regulatory landscape, specifically in Mexico. Going back to your question, Alvaro, I wanted to highlight two challenges that derive in a huge opportunity for the financial sector in Mexico. First, the lack of financial inclusion. I think it's no surprise for anyone in this panel that Mexico is lagging in terms of financial inclusion. Half of the population does not hold a savings account, which is one of the most basic financial services, and only 1 out of 10 Mexicans holds a banking credit card. So compared to other countries, such as Brazil, which Alba was mentioning, where 70% of the population has a banking account, Mexico has a delay in this topic. And in my opinion, this is not a problem that derives from the demand side of the market. It's not that Mexicans do not want to have an account or do not need a credit line to fulfill their goals. At least part of this problem is explained by the second challenge, which is a traditionally concentrated financial sector in Mexico, especially banking sector or banking services in Mexico. For example, the 7 biggest banks in Mexico concentrate 77% of the total assets of the country and 81% of the credit portfolio. So this lack of competition or relaxed competition diminishes incentives for these traditional firms or banks to offer competitive services. For example, low commissions, to pay yield on the savings of people. So this had been the landscape which Mexican consumers had to face for many, many years. Fortunately, this is changing with digitalization of financial services. As I was anticipating, many firms, many digital platforms have entered the Mexican market thanks to the fintech law, which was one of the first in the world, but also through other figures that have allowed completely digital firms to offer financial services with more competitive or more just terms for consumers. So the entry of these firms to the Mexican market is, and the growth that they've had. For example, New Mexico, we hold more than 5.5 million clients in Mexico. So it is not, I think this is proof that the problem or the lack of financial inclusion does not come from the demand side, because Mexicans are interested in holding banking accounts and are interested on accessing credit. So the growth of these firms is proof of that. And the opportunity that derives from this is how, or the question we should be asking ourselves is how can we allow or enable more firms to come into the Mexican market, more digital finances firms to come into the Mexican market, and not only that, but to also grow and effectively compete with traditional institutions. How can we enable these firms to evolve into the regulatory figures that they need or that that are suitable for them to be able to offer all the services that Mexicans have been needing for so long. And I think neobanks is a good example of this. Nubank has done this in Brazil, for example, where they have more than 50% of the population as clients. So I think we should be asking ourselves of the opportunities, how we can have more digital finances firms and how can we enable them to grow.
Thank you, Majo. And I think you're raising really good points, right? How competition fosters, better things for end customers, how the ecosystem is receiving really well this type of initiatives, the transformation that Nubank is basically facing to be a bank, an official bank, I think will allow, better services, better goods, etc. And with that, I'll turn over to Pepe. So Pepe, we always talk about the balance between regulation and growth around innovation and compliance. So can you talk a little bit about how you're envisioning this balance to be maintained? Something we should be always looking for is to have or safeguarding the customers' goals, objectives, etc. But at the same point, we need to allow innovation to come in. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, of course. First, let me tell you that conceptually, I think that question is a very easy to answer. But in real life, it isn't. It is actually very, very difficult. So I don't know if you hear, are you, yeah? Is it okay?
Yes.
Okay, more or less, okay. Well, the concept is that compliance is not negotiable. You have to comply with regulation, right? But it is also true that you have to pursue innovation. So you have to comply with regulation because that's what creates trust. And trust is the most important value in our industry, right? So it is true that there's a permanent but also relative friction between compliance and innovation. So I think, and I'm saying that friction is relative because regulations are always incomplete and are always interpretable. So I think there's two main ways, at least, to how you can inform regulation by innovating. The first one, that is pretty obvious, is being involved in the making of regulation. In that way, you won't be limited anymore by regulation, but you can be pushed, you can be potentialized by it. But you have to participate, you have to be involved in the making of the regulation. The second one, which I consider is more important, at least it is more entertaining and challenging, is that you have to provide an adequate or reasonable sense to regulation in the practice. So it is a matter of creativity and reasonability. Let me give you an example. Nowadays, with the current regulation in Mexico, it is not that clear how you should consider stablecoins. And I mean, it is not that clear that stablecoins are what the fintech law calls virtual assets. So you have to wonder yourself if you are limited because of that, or if you are potentialized because of that. And I think that you have to think about the different scenarios. You have to think about the different business models that different legal entities can develop, considering it a virtual asset or considering that it isn't a virtual asset. So I think that even when compliance is, as I said before, not negotiable, innovation has a lot to say to compliance because of what I just said.
Thank you, Pepe. No, very important points, the ones you're bringing together. I agree with you. Compliance should not be negotiable. And I think it's really important for that reason to have a regulator always open to innovation and technology, right? Use of cloud, et cetera, AI. And with that, I'll turn over to Viviana. Viviana, you come from a regulated bank, right? I would like to understand a little bit more about how a bank, it's also being, adapting to this new kind of trend of fintechs, neobanks entering into playing and competing, very, very directly. So can you talk a little bit about your experience regarding regulatory change and digital transformation?
Yes, thank you. Before that, I want to talk about before working for Mizuho Bank. I used to work for a traditional bank, red bank, Canadian bank in the past. And I see this revolution because after that, I used to work for Sabadell. As you know, Sabadell is a digital bank. And I see a lot of differences between the two banks. In the first case, for example, I remember that this bank has all the infrastructure on-premise, structured programming, these big servers, mainframes, and tandems in the past. And after that, when I work for Sabadell Bank, I see total transformation, digital transformation, because this bank uses different infrastructure, for example, cloud environments, as you know, the APIs, interfaces, onboarding process, digital onboarding process. Is very, very different to work for a traditional bank and when you work in a digital bank. And I think that also the ideas that you can see are so different. I think that it's more important for a digital bank to the customer experience. For example, the response time and all the things that are related with customer experience. But talking about the regulations, I think that all the regulators are established a lot of regulations, for example, related to information security, information technology, IT providers, onboarding, also AML, though, anti-money laundering, KYC. But as Pepe said, I think that there are missing a lot of regulations, for example, for all the new topics related to digital transformation. They are missing regulations related to, for example, artificial intelligence. There are a lot of trends for or new threats for information security. You have new type of attacks, for example, with this digital transformation. There are missing also regulation related to cloud environments. There are a lot of information that all these type of fintechs, neobanks are sharing about the customers. And I think that it's important to establish provisions or regulations related to these topics, because there are a lot of information that could be shared that you don't know that other provider or other entity has about you. And I think that this is a very important topic. I think that there are missing also regulations related to privacy. In Mexico, we have the Ley de Protección de Datos, but I think that this regulation is needs some enhancements, because this regulation was made, I don't remember the year, but I think that need some enhancements for talking about the digital environments. And that's all.
Thank you, Viviana. Back to you, Pepe. I continue saying that when there's no need to discover the wheel, we shouldn't take the effort to, but to learn from other places, right? So I would like to get your opinion on our approach on learning from other countries, other economies, get the lessons learned in order to start implementing changes in Mexico, right? We have a really good example, and we have Majo here from NU, right, on what happened in Brazil. Also, we have really good things happening in Europe, in Germany, around certain fintechs, the US, Israel. So can you talk a little bit about how you're seeing, the Latin American sector, mainly Mexico, learning from other places in the world and implementing it in the regulations?
Of course. I hope this is better. I think it is. Okay, so let me tell you first that I think that Latin America's fintech sector isn't just a beneficiary of international experiences. Latin America has a lot to say to the world, not only about regulation, fintech regulation, but also about the needs it can solve. We have a unique series of challenges that shape our needs and that shape our regulation and our businesses. So some of them are the valuation, are in certain countries the lack of their own currency, and also financial inclusion. So on the other hand, yes, we can inform from international experiences and international regulation. For example, we always see Europe and the US as our goals or standards, right? And there are a lot of regulations that can inform us, but there are others that cannot inform us because our reality is different from there. So some of them that I think that can inform us are, for example, the PSD2 of Europe that has driven to a movement of open banking, to that kind of services that I think are going to make services faster, more efficient, in the sense that they will cost less, etc. right? Or you have the GDPR, which is not essentially financial, but in this world, which is more and more complex each day, there is a concern of customers about the data we manage, we as a financial entities manage. So I think that there's a lot to learn from the GDPR, but also there's MiCA, that is especially about cryptos and blockchain, and you can see how innovation can be regulated in one way, not a perfect way, but as Viviana was saying, you have a lot of regulation lacking in Latin America. So you have to regulate, you have to get that regulation in another level, you have to make it better, but in the practice, you will see how to regulate it in accordance with your reality, right? So I think Alvaro, that it is not a one-way relationship or communication. It is not only that we have to inform our regulation or our business from Europe, from the US, or from other jurisdictions, but it is a bi-directional relationship.
Agree with you, Pepe. Totally agree with you. And this is a great segue to get back to Viviana, because I would like to understand a little bit better what has been the behaviors in terms of collaboration between the traditional banking or traditional financial system with the so-called fintech neobank, and what implications do that bring to the regulatory framework in which all of these entities act upon. So can you extend a little bit on that?
Yes, I think that the regulatory frameworks are the same, because as I said, I think that there are a lot of missing regulations. Talking about the collaboration, I think that now the traditional banks or the old banks are collaborating a lot with the fintechs, neobanks, and other entities. For example, if a fintech has implemented a new infrastructure, the things that I was talking about, for example, the APIs, the Kubernetes, and all the new infrastructure topics that I was talking about, this traditional bank can use the new infrastructure that is implemented. I think that is a good way to collaborate with these new institutions or entities, and to, for example, to give a different experience to the customer. I think that is important to these different types of entities can collaborate. And you can see now, for example, a lot of partnerships. For example, a card that is from a retailer, but the infrastructure is operated by a bank or a neobank or fintech. Maybe now you can see also airlines that are in this operating model. I think that all the entities, financial and all type of entities are collaborating, are sharing infrastructure, and I think that now they understand that it's the way to offer best products to the customers and to really make a change. And for example, to obtain a thing or a product or anything that you can offer to the customer. And I think that is here we are talking about that the customer is you need to offer to the customers the new things, the digital products. And I think that is the way that you can, or the banks can do that.
Thank you, Viviana. Alba, you continue to be on the spot now. So I would like to understand from you, how does continued change and transformation of the regulatory environment affects the evolution of the fintech and new bank sector?
Thank you, Alvaro. Think about this. I mean that the regulation is the regulation, as Pepe has said. So the regulatory risk can turn into legal risk if you fail to comply with the regulation. So we have, I mean, the authority can impose any kind of penalties, fines, can revoke the authorization that has given. If you are in the middle of an authorization process, they cannot give you the authorization if you fail to comply with the law. So what can we do when the regulator transforms the law in a sense that can be difficult to comply with that? And we can find the over-regulation. It's difficult. I mean, I think that Pepe has explained very well about the compliance and the challenges that involves. Well, we cannot stop to consider that the regulation is the regulation. So thinking about that, how can fintech companies can have an impact of the regulation? I mean, how can find the ways to work with the regulator in order to have regulation more efficient and comply with objectives without inhibit the innovation. For example, thinking about laws based on principles. Why? Because as you can imagine, modify a law is really difficult and we have to go to the Congress. But if we have general rules, we can have secondary regulation, and it's more easy to modify the secondary regulation that modify the law. And we can have regulatory process that involve more activity of the fintech company working together with the regulator. I mean, assuming that the regulation is the regulation, we can work together with the regulator in order to have more convenient regulation. As an important example, I would like to think about the sandbox, regulatory sandbox here in Mexico. It was one of the main objectives of fintech law, having a sandbox, regulatory sandbox space to promote the innovation. But the requirements that are in the law are so difficult to comply that, do you know how many sandboxes we have here in Mexico? Anyone? 0. And how can we promote the innovation if we have strict requirements in the law? So that's a really good example about, think about laws based on principles, secondary regulation, flexible process of regulatory process, I mean, that interact the fintech companies and the authorities.
Thank you, Alba. Yeah, it's incredible that we haven't used the sandbox provision with the fintech law. Yeah, I think it's something that we will need to review with the regulator for the evolution of such law in order to foster that type of environment, right? Yeah. Majo, you're representing the Fintech Association and also New Mexico, right? You have to engage the regulator for different things. You're engaging it today for your transformation and in the Fintech Association in connection to the representation of a bunch of entities that have different interests on growth. Can you share a little bit of your experience, some lessons learned that our audience may use and the strategies that you think are good to work on?
Yeah, of course. And I want to build on what Alba and Viviana and Pepe were saying. First, I think there is certain openness from Mexican regulators to discuss and to advance in regulatory change and regulatory pro-competitive interpretation of regulation. I want to use 3 examples. The first one is the secondary open banking regulation that you've been mentioning during this panel, Alba, Pepe, and Viviana. As Alba was mentioning, the fintech law considers this scheme of open finances. However, secondary regulation has not been issued yet. The Fintech Association has been closely working not only with the regulator, with CMBB, but also with international organizations such as the British Embassy to push for this regulation, but not only to push for the regulation, but to ensure that the published regulation allows for this scheme to actually work. So I think there is still huge opportunity to keep pushing for the publication of these regulation for all the benefits that you've been mentioning regarding that scheme. And it is important to keep this dialogue open with the regulator to ensure that, for example, API standardization standards are included in that regulation, that free of charge information exchange is also considered in the regulation, that requirements to ensure a safe and frictionless experience for consumers to transfer their information is included in that regulation. So it is important to keep working hand by hand with the regulator, and I think the Fintech Association has done a great job in that sense. The second example I want to use is digital payments. As you know, more than 90% of transactions under 500 pesos are done in cash here in Mexico. We need to change that. Banxico, the central bank, has done a great work in making available digital payments methods such as CODI and now DIMO. And we've been working together with Banxico to learn from other places such as Brazil, which did a great job with PIX in changing the cash-dominated economy, and also to learn from them how can we scale together this experience. How can we make Mexican people and Mexican businesses, small businesses, to accept DIMO as a payment method, in order for it to be not only person-to-person payment method, but also a person-to-merchant payment method. I think that digital platforms have a lot to say in this regard because customers are more inclined to use these technologies as they are more digitally educated, and also there are early adopters. So I think we digital platforms have a lot to say and a lot to share and exchange with regulators in order to make this DIMO method payment work. And lastly, I want to point out at the onboarding regulation that Viviana was mentioning. I think CMBB has done a great job in advancing how different regulatory figures can use digital onboarding processes. However, I think there's still a lot to do in terms of removing frictions from regulation to have a easy, inclusive experience that allows all sorts of persons to open accounts and access a credit line remotely, and not only those who have more digital knowledge or a more sophisticated mobile phone. So these are three examples in which the Fintech Association and also New Mexico have been collaborating with the main regulators, CMBB and Banxico. I think there is great progress, and we need to keep pushing and collaborating for these and other topics to advance in order to create a regulatory framework that allows for what I was saying earlier, not only the entry of more participants, but also the growth and the evolution of these participants to ensure that digital platforms are not segregated to the borderline of the sector, but to actually be able to effectively compete with banks with financial services.
No, thank you, Maria Jose, for this. I think as a recap of this panel, we have learned that regulation is there, we have to comply with, we have to work and collaborate with the regulator, we have to embrace competition in order to bring good things, and we have to also acknowledge the need to continue innovating and accepting change and work towards better integration, more inclusion, more education. And I think with that, we will continue fostering a great environment towards fintechs in Mexico and in the region, right? Thank you very much all for this conversation, and looking forward to continue talking with you. Thank you. Thank you.